While in public, Republicans might worship at the feet of Donald Trump, in private, many of them think he's a buffoon. And we just got secret grand jury transcripts confirming that from the now dead Georgia election interference case in 2022. So for example, in his testimony, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who just last week called Trump
the greatest president of all time,
also called Trump's scheme to enlist fake electors from swing states in 2020 weird, and adding, "I don't know what to tell you, just weird." With him saying at the time, "I have told him more times than we can count that he fell short," and then adding, "If you told him Martians came and stole votes, he'd be inclined to believe it." But also, Graham's not alone here. You also had former Georgia State House Speaker David Ralston, who resisted Trump's demands that he try to throw out the election results.
You do it to uncover fraud. You could say for transparency and to uncover fraud, possible fraud. So who's going to stop you for that? It's like
a federal judge.
With him later calling the fake elector scheme the craziest thing I've heard. Also, you had Liz Cheney saying that on January 6th, after rioters had already stormed the Capitol, her fellow GOP House members lined up to sign on to sheets objecting to Biden's electoral votes. One of them, Mark Green, saying sheepishly to no one in particular, "The things we do for the orange Jesus." All of that craziness and the flip-flopping since then and the gaslighting, it's not just ancient history. It matters right now because Trump's approval ratings, they're in the toilet. You've got polling predicting that if nothing changes, Democrats are gonna win the midterms. And historically, the governing party, it just tends to lose the first midterm after winning the presidency. So there's a lot of talk right now about, are we going to see a replay of the 2020 election? Now, of course, there is a difference. The presidency itself isn't up for grabs until 2028, but in a speech to House Republicans this month, you had Trump casting 2026 as existential for him.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
Also, keeping that in mind, at another point he added,
"Now, I won't say cancel the election. They should cancel the election because the fake news will say he wants the elections canceled. He's a dictator."
Right, and with all this, you're seeing experts worried that Trump might invoke the Insurrection Act and deploy the military, the National Guard, or federal agents to Democratic cities on Election Day. Right, and short of, just canceling the elections, which is something Trump definitely cannot do legally, there are numerous levers that he can pull to try to make things go his way. Right, he's already got Republicans in Texas, Ohio, Missouri, and North Carolina to redraw congressional districts 5 years ahead of schedule. In Florida, they still may join in. Then in August, he announced that he directed his Commerce Department to immediately begin work on a new census that excludes non-citizens. And that could be huge because the census determines how many electoral votes and House seats each state gets, as well as how their maps are drawn. But there, I'll say it's highly unlikely that Trump can force a new mid-decade census in time to impact the midterms at least, especially with primaries happening early in the year. But there is much more, right? For example, he truthed last August, "I'm going to lead a movement to get rid of mail-in ballots, and also, while we're at it, highly inaccurate, very expensive, and seriously controversial voting machines, which cost 10 times more than accurate and sophisticated watermark paper, which is faster and leaves no doubt at the end of the evening as to who won and who lost the election. We will begin this effort, which will be strongly opposed by the Democrats because they cheat at levels never seen before, by signing an executive order to help bring honesty to the 2026 midterm elections. Remember, the states are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes. They must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them for the good of our country to do. The mail-in ballot hoax using voting machines that are a complete and total disaster must end now." So, few things. First of all, it is not true that states are merely an agent of the federal government. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite, right? The Constitution gives states broad leeway to run elections how they see fit. Second, there's no evidence that mail-in ballots are fraudulent, but maybe more importantly, neither is there for voting machines. In fact, if anything, they're much more accurate and faster than tallying votes by hand. And so if Trump got his way and, states stopped using voting machines altogether, states would have to recruit hundreds of thousands of additional poll workers. Results would take days, weeks, or even months to compute, and recounts and court challenges, they'd probably spike because the tallies would be less reliable. But, even if he can't get rid of them, Trump can still sow distrust in the machines and then exploit that confusion to do the nuclear option, seizing them by force. Where during his interview with the New York Times last week, he expressed regret that he didn't order the National Guard to seize voting machines after the election in 2020. Right, and for some context there, in December of that year, two of his most crackpot outside advisors, Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn, they urged him to direct the military or federal agents to seize voting machines, and they even presented him with draft executive orders to do it. And Trump, he seemed receptive at the time, right? He brought up the idea with his attorney general, Bill Barr, who then shot it down. And then he directed Rudy Giuliani to ask high-ranking DHS officials if they could actually legally seize the machines, but that was shot down again. And so now Trump, he told the Times he should have just moved forward with the idea, which then raises the question, if he tries to do that in 2026, who's going to stop him? Right? Probably not AG Pam Bondi, who, as Trump's lawyer in 2020, claimed that he actually won Pennsylvania and then dodged questions about whether Biden won during her confirmation hearings as Attorney General. Definitely not Harmeet K. Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General and head of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which oversees voting issues, who's an election denier. You also have Heather Honey, the Deputy Assistant Secretary at Homeland Security, who now helps oversee election infrastructure. She's also probably unlikely because she worked on a probe into Arizona's 2020 election and has challenged voters' eligibility in Pennsylvania. You then have Eric Neff, the acting chief of the DOJ's Voting Rights Division, who once filed highly dubious charges against the head of an election software company when he was a prosecutor. And then, of course, you have this man, Kash Patel, and he has his own history of election denialism. How Trump's White House reportedly vetted job applicants all the way down to entry-level positions with questions like, who won the 2020 presidential election? And so even if Democrats do well and understand the message of this is not to just give up or don't go out, you gotta make the numbers matter and undeniable. You have some Dems worried that with their extensive gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other tactics, they just might cling on to their razor-thin House majority anyway. And so with the lunatics running the asylum here being the executive branch, one of the main checks left on Trump's power is the conservative judiciary, which I will say does hold out some hope, though how much is really an open question. Where the Supreme Court upheld the gerrymandered map in Texas, but there are other maps still being considered. It also dealt Trump a surprising blow recently by ruling that his deployment of National Guard to Chicago was illegal, so it's doubtful whether they'd support a scheme to seize voting machines. But with all this, I'll say they're set to hear a case this summer addressing the legality of Trump's executive order barring election officials from accepting mail-in ballots received after Election Day, even if they're postmarked before. And that's big on its own, but also because the U.S. Postal Service just changed its guidelines so that some mail won't be postmarked until days after it was put into the mailbox. But hey, we are still many months away from November, and there is a lot that could happen in that time, including the resurrection of his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. Which, yeah, you might say that's impossible, but how many things are we living through right now that felt impossible just weeks, months, and years ago?